Well, excuse me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Gregg. Thank you for dragging yourselves out of bed to get here after the attendee party last night. I know 9 a.m. is early for me. It's probably early for some of you after that, too. I'm going to be talking today about developing solutions for OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, and we have some hopefully cool things to show you guys that you'll be excited about. How many of you are familiar with OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, just to sort of start off? Most everyone? Okay, that's good. And then how many of you use OneDrive Personal versus OneDrive for Business? If it's OneDrive for Business that you use, can you raise your hands? Okay, so a whole lot of you are on the personal side. How do I make this clicker work? There we go. I guess people aren't necessarily filling out evaluations after each session, so make sure that you fill out your evaluation. You can get entered to win some cool prize that I don't know what it is. I'm sure all of you now, if you've been attending any of the Office 365 developer talks, have seen these slides, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. But there's when it comes to Office, there's the user experience side of things, which is actually extending the Office products themselves, and then there's working with data that is stored in Office. Obviously, on the OneDrive and OneDrive for Business side of this talk, we're going to be talking about the data and accessing that data from our APIs and our SDKs. So quick agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what is OneDrive, but most of you know what it is, so I won't spend too much time there. I'll give you an overview of our new developer platform that we've rolled out over the last few months, and then we'll sort of do a deep dive into actually how to use pieces of that developer platform to go build a solution. And the last thing on the list here, webhooks, we'll talk about a new feature that's coming soon, which hopefully you'll be excited about. So what is OneDrive? It's simply one place for everything in your work and your life. It's a great cloud storage solution that lets you securely store files and folders in the cloud and get to them from any device, anytime, anywhere. It's great for synchronizing files across all of your devices. We have sync clients for Mac, we have sync clients for Windows, we have mobile clients for all the different devices that you might be using. So you can really get to the files that you've put into OneDrive from anywhere you happen to be. We also have powerful search capabilities powered by Bing and by Fast to make it really easy to find the things that you're looking for. If you're like me and you have 300 gigabytes of data in your OneDrive, browsing through the folder hierarchy isn't always the fastest way to find something. Search is great. We're also deeply integrated with Office. We have great collaboration experiences inside the Office clients and inside the Office web apps, and have great experiences on top of the Office clients as well. And it's available for both personal and business scenarios. So we have OneDrive for Business, which is a great, secure, environment for businesses, and then we have OneDrive Personal, which is also a great secure environment for your personal files. I don't know how many of you have tried out the Windows 10 technical previews or been running Windows 10 on your laptop. You may have noticed some changes between the way that OneDrive works on Windows 10 and the way it worked in Windows 8.1. We've gone back to the selective sync model, which means that some files will be cloud only if your device doesn't have enough room for all of them. That's an important thing to remember when you're thinking about the developer experience there, because you can't just assume that all of the files in somebody's OneDrive will be on the machine. You need to think about maybe using our APIs to get to them and going beyond just a file system access. And then, of course, which OneDrive should you be using? If you're on a personal side, OneDrive for Personal or OneDrive Consumer is the right tool for you to be using. It's really optimized around documents, photos, and files that can be accessed from anywhere, and it's really designed for content that you personally own. And then OneDrive for Business is really a great solution for files that are owned by the enterprise. So if you're in a work context or you're developing an app for a work context, really integrating with OneDrive for Business is the obvious choice. If you're working on a personal app or an app that you think that end users will be using on their own, then using OneDrive Personal is the right choice. And honestly, we think for a lot of apps, targeting both is really the right answer. And I know that in the past that has been painful, so we'll have some fun things to talk about how to make that easier today. Why should you use OneDrive as a platform? So a lot of people think about OneDrive as just a big hard drive in the cloud, and we're pretty good at doing that, but we're also good at doing a bunch of other things too. Really, one of the great scenarios that you can use OneDrive for is connecting your app through to where all of the users' files are. So in the past, 10, 15 years ago, everybody had all of their files on a big hard drive inside their computer, probably even 5 years ago, really. But now a lot of people are moving those files into the cloud, and with integration built into Windows, now more and more of those files are actually landing in the cloud. And so when you build an application that runs on the desktop or on a mobile device and doesn't integrate with the cloud, suddenly you don't have access to all of the files that the user is expecting. So integrating to OneDrive there is really important. The other thing is that OneDrive is really a great platform for roaming data across to different devices and making sure that your continuity of experience exists between your mobile app on an Android device, your mobile app on a Windows Phone device, your mobile app on an iOS device, and a Windows app or even a web app. So having the data flow between all of those devices and connected is really easy if you use OneDrive. We're also the backend that backs all of these Microsoft apps and provides really great cloud scenarios. So if you've used Office for iPad, you know that every time you open a file, every time you save a file, it's just going to OneDrive. We're the backend that powers that app. You can also look at a new feature in Outlook called Cloud Attachments, where instead of actually sending attachments around, you're actually sending sharing links to those files, and those files live in OneDrive. So there's really neat scenarios around user content that you can power by integrating deeply into OneDrive. And we can provide that value relatively easily. And of course, you can build great killer cloud experiences on top of OneDrive as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So when you look at the OneDrive platform, OneDrive and OneDrive for Business platform, there's sort of two pathways that you can go when you think about how to integrate. There's what we call pickers and savers, which are really for quick integrations. Think of this as the file picker or the common file dialog from Windows or Win32. Like, this is a quick way to just drop in a few lines of code into your application and be able to open a file or save a file back to OneDrive without really thinking about what's going on, without getting into the details of how OneDrive works, without getting sort of deep into our API, I would say. And then we have a brand new OneDrive API, which I'll be spending a lot of time talking about, which is for deeper solutions. So if you want to do more on top of just writing a file or just opening a file, if you want to sync changes back and forth between OneDrive, if you want to deal with thumbnails, if you want to deal with sharing links, any of those sort of more advanced features, then the OneDrive API is really the way to go. So I'm going to spend a little time going into both of these. We're going to start off with pickers and savers, and I'll do a couple demos there just to show you quickly how those work, and then we'll do a deep dive into the OneDrive API, and you guys can see how more robust solutions work. So pickers and savers, like I said, just a quick way to integrate into OneDrive. And here's a quick example. So if you want to open something from OneDrive, this is a JavaScript app. We have SDKs for JavaScript, for iOS, for Android, and then built in on Windows Phone as well, and Windows Universal apps in Windows 10. In JavaScript, if you want to open a file, literally you just define an object that has a success and a cancel method, and then you say, what type of link are you looking for? Do you want to have a download URL for that file, or do you want to have what we called a web view link, which is a sharing link to that file? And then you call, in this case, you call the create open button, which will actually inject a button into your HTML page, or you can have your own custom button and call the open method. Really, really simple, really straightforward, and I'll show you now a demo of how that works. So here I am in Atom, because I didn't know about Visual Studio Code until yesterday, and I wasn't going to change my demo. But this is just a simple HTML page that I have that uses Bootstrap to give me some UI. I've created a text area in here called Notepad. Oh, I guess I should back up. The app I'm going to create here is just a simple web version of Notepad. So you can open a file at a OneDrive, you can edit it in a text editor, and then you can save it back to OneDrive. Not a very complicated app, but also really not very complicated in JavaScript either. So I have a text area that I'm going to use to actually hold the contents of the file. And then I have an open button and a save button somewhere in my navigation bar. And then the code that I had to do to open that is just find my open button, wire up to the onClick event, and then say after I call the open function, when successful, get the download URL, and then actually download the contents of that file and stick it into my file name object. And then I want a download link, and I don't want to allow multi-select. And then I just call OneDrive.open, and magically everything happens. Same thing on the save side. In this case, I'm actually doing a little bit of a trick where I'm going to build a base64 encoded data URL so that the contents of my JavaScript app can actually write a file back. The other thing that you can do is have a browse button and allow the user to actually browse to a file that they want to upload to OneDrive, which is a really useful scenario as well. And then again, it's the same sort of thing. I just build this options object where I say, what's the file that I want to upload, what's the file name I want to give it, and then I have a success and a cancel function. And then all I have to do is call OneDrive.save, and magic happens. And so if I go over here, here's my OneDrive Notepad app. Really simple. Here's my text area. Here are my open and save buttons. I click open. You'll see the OneDrive experience pop up. Oops. I'll log in with my password. And here I am using the OneDrive UI to actually browse the contents of my OneDrive. All of this is hidden behind that OneDrive.open thing. I didn't have to think about UI. I didn't have to think about how to integrate it into my web app. I didn't have to think about how to handle pop-ups. Everything just worked perfectly for me. And I can go in here, and I can say, oh, here's the file I want. I'm going to open search.md. And hey, magic happens. Takes a little while. Here's the contents of that file. I can edit this file here. I can say, this is an edit, built 2015. In this case, now I'll change the file name just to save it back to something different. And I'll click Save As. And again, get a password prompt, which is actually a bug that we'll be fixing shortly. And then it says, where do you want to save this file to? I'll put it back into my OD Notepad folder. And presto, my file is saved back to OneDrive. So you'll notice, or sort of behind the scenes, what you may not notice is that all of this is a single page web app, so Cores is fully implemented on our SDKs and our APIs. Everything works nicely within this. I didn't get browser errors. I didn't get warnings about not being able to do cross-site scripting or anything like that. Everything is just nicely automated and smoothly hidden away. And actually, if I go back to my OneDrive, we should see that that file got uploaded. Yep, there it is. So those are the OneDrive picker and saver experiences. Right now, these are only available for the consumer version of OneDrive. If you care about OneDrive for Business, probably the first thing that you would want to ask me afterwards is, when are these things going to be available for OneDrive for Business? It's definitely feedback that we've heard a lot, and it's on the top of our list to deliver for later this summer. And so we'll be providing that same sort of experience for OneDrive for Business soon. So that's the simplest possible thing that you can do to integrate with OneDrive. And that's really a quick scenario. You want to add an attachment to something, you want to add a file, you want to open a file, just dirt simple experiences getting files in and out of OneDrive. Most of the time, though, we think that people are going to want to go above and beyond that. And that's where we've delivered the new OneDrive API. And we actually launched this for OneDrive Consumer, or Personal OneDrive, in February. And in less than a day, we had our first application learn the API and go integrate it. And that was with draw.io. And they were like super happy. They were like, this is the best API ever. It's so clean and straightforward and easy to use. And we were like, oh, thank you. That's nice to hear. So our goals when we set out to build this new OneDrive API were that it would be a really clean, intuitive REST API for OneDrive. We wanted to make it really easy for people to integrate without reading a bunch of documentation, without really thinking about how the API works, without needing to go read a manual to understand how to use an API, like some of the APIs in the past have been. A couple other things that we worked on were like, we really wanted to work the way you did. So if you've used some of the other cloud storage APIs, you'll see that some of them require you to use IDs to address files. So if you want to navigate 4 levels in the hierarchy, you have to enumerate the contents of one folder, find the folder you're looking for, grab its ID, call the same thing again to figure out the next level of hierarchy, and it's just painful. You have to make all these calls. On the other hand, having an ID is really nice in some cases where you want to track a file when it moves, because IDs tend to be immutable. And so other competition that we have uses just path in their REST API. So if you want to keep track of a file moving from one folder to another, that's kind of hard to do. You have to go figure out where the file with that same hash is, and it's a lot of manual work. So we said, both of those are actually really useful depending on the scenario that you're using, so we want to support both of them. So we came up with a clean way to be able to work with both paths and IDs inside our REST namespace. We're also really rich in functionality, which I'll dig into here a little bit more. We use OAuth 2 authentication, which I'm not going to dig into a whole lot because there have been several other sessions here that have talked about how OAuth works. And if you have any questions, we have a really great document on our website that talks about how to do all of that. And of course, you can find me or Darren later if you have questions there. And then we're also OData v4 compatible, which if you're using an OData client library to connect to us is a really great feature. It also is nice because there's a $metadata endpoint that you can use to actually go discover all of the functionality in our API in a nice XML format if you don't want to go read the documentation, although you should go read the documentation. So navigating your way, like I said, you can use both paths or you can use IDs. We use a colon character in the URL, which some of you might think is a little strange, but it lets us transition back and forth between path space inside the URL and URL space inside the URL. So for example, the first one here where I'm saying /drive/root:/contoso/project A. So drive and root are the API namespace, and then we use the colon to transition into the hierarchy of the file system. And then we actually use the colon to transition back out to say, like, give me the children of that folder that I addressed. Or you can use just the IDs, so you can do /drive/items and then an ID number and children. So really, you can use either one, whichever one you favor, whichever one your application needs, whichever one makes the most sense to you, and everything works. And in fact, this system works everywhere throughout our API. So anywhere you get to a place that we expect to either have anywhere where you get to a place we have an item identifier, you can use colons to delineate a text or a path or a file name, or you can use an item ID. So you can do cool things like combine the two of them together. You can say /drive/items and then an ID to a folder and then : and a file name. So you don't have to think about how to specify a file name in some weird collection or something like that. It just all works seamlessly there. You can also do things like address entities within a file. So in the last case, we have a collection of thumbnails, and you can actually just directly address the thumbnail collection off of a file without having to first pull back all of the metadata for the file, have that tell you what the URLs for the thumbnails are, and then be able to extract it. Another big thing that we heard from people over and over again on our old OneDrive APIs was that it was really hard to know what had changed inside OneDrive. You had to essentially enumerate every folder, look at all the E tags, and figure out what items had changed and what to do about it. So we added a capability to be able to actually synchronize the changes out of OneDrive. You can call it on any folder, or you can call it on the root folder. If you want to know what's happening across an entire user's drive, call it on root. If you only care about your apps folder, you can actually call the view.changes API on just your app folder and find out what has changed there. It sort of works like any sync API, and I'll actually show you an example of this when we get into the demo here. The other cool thing that we added was app folders. So for people who develop apps for OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, before, the only thing that you could do was ask for access to the entire OneDrive. So a lot of users, as we start seeing more and more files go into OneDrive, they put their tax records there, they put their medical records there, they put their pictures that they don't necessarily want everybody to have access to there. And then an app comes along and says, hey, to use this little drawing app, you need to grant the drawing app full access to everything in your OneDrive. You know, like most of the time, people trust the apps that they're using, but if you don't, or if you're a little questioning, you know, do you really want to give that app access to all of your tax returns for the last 7 years? I don't. And so we actually saw like a 50% fallout rate when that accept decline button pops up, and people would just be like, I don't trust this app, I'm going to cancel out of it. To get around that, we created a concept called app folders. So instead of asking for full permission to your entire OneDrive, the app can say, just give me access to my own folder within OneDrive. I don't care about everything else that's there. Or if I do care about other files, I can go back and use a picker to actually open one of those files. But I just want access to a place that I can keep data. And then we'll actually go manage that folder for you. We'll create the folder the first time your app tries to do something with it. If the user moves that folder somewhere else, we'll keep track of where it went to so that you don't have to think about that. You just keep addressing that folder in a static way, and everything works nicely. And you don't have to ask for permissions to the entire OneDrive, which makes your app more trustworthy and makes users more likely to click that, yep, I'll allow it. We also added support for large files. So I think it was about a year ago that OneDrive bumped the maximum file size up to 10 gigabytes. And I know OneDrive for Business is in the process of bumping that file size limit up to the same size. But our APIs said 100 megabytes is the biggest file you can put into OneDrive. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Like you're saying that on one side, the system supports 10 gigabyte files, but on the other side, you only let apps upload 100 megabytes. And so we went and created a fragment upload API, which basically lets you upload files up to 10 gigabytes in size in small fragments. So you can divide it into chunks of like 10 megabytes and upload those 10 megabyte chunks. And then if something happens, you don't have to re-upload the entire file. You can go back to the last fragment that was uploaded, and everything works great. The other thing that we did, which makes this even a little bit nicer, is there's an upload from URL API as well. So if you don't actually have the contents of the file that you want to upload in your app and it's stored on some public internet server somewhere, you can call our upload API and say, go grab the file from this URL. And then what our system will actually do is go download the contents of that URL, stream it into the user's OneDrive, and then commit it into OneDrive. So you don't have to manage the bits over the wire. If you're on a mobile device and you want to upload a movie that's already in your backend to OneDrive, you don't have to stream it down through the mobile device and then back up to OneDrive. You can just say, here's the public URL for that thing. Go fetch that file, and there it is in OneDrive. I talked a little bit about CORS already, but I'd just emphasize again that like everything in our API is CORS compatible. So if you're building a single-page JavaScript app that wants to interact with OneDrive, you can do everything. The entire API is available to you. That's really great for the types of apps that we're seeing people build these days, and I'm excited that we can offer that as a feature, since not everybody in our competition actually has that kind of feature. App permissions, I talked about this as part of app folder, but there's basically 3 app permissions that you need to worry about, and then there's the no permissions world. So when you're using the pickers and savers, there's never long-term permissions granted to your application. It's just, here's access to this one file that the user has selected. You have access to that for the next 30 minutes or the next hour, but you never give sort of long-term access to the OneDrive. Then you can, when you start using the API, you can step up and say, I want OneDrive.readOnly, which is full access to the entire OneDrive, but in a read-only fashion, so I can't modify anything. You can do OneDrive.readWrite, which gives you full read-write access to everything, obviously. And then you can do the app folder, which is really where we think that a lot of apps should be going. And always, you should use the least permissive scope available to you. That way, users are more likely to trust your application and feel comfortable connecting it into their OneDrive. So something new, I don't know how many of you were paying attention to the OneDrive blog this week or to the OneDrive developer website, but on Wednesday, we announced that the OneDrive API is now available for OneDrive for Business as well. So in the past, when you were building solutions for OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, all of you are aware that OneDrive for Business is based on SharePoint and OneDrive isn't. So they're 2 separate systems. They had 2 different APIs. They had 2 ways of thinking about how to interact with files. And then now we're finally sort of bringing that back together and saying, the scenarios aren't different. It's just a work versus life scenario here. The app developers shouldn't have to go learn an entirely different framework to be able to build for OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. So let's fix that. And what we've done is we've actually built a new API on top of SharePoint and on top of OneDrive for Business that looks exactly like the API that we offer on OneDrive Personal. It's available in SharePoint today. It is 95% deployed to tenants in SharePoint, so odds are if you have a OneDrive for Business tenant and you go try this new API, it will work. I think by Monday it will be at 100%, and so it will work for everybody. Now, it is a preview. There is considerably reduced functionality compared to what we offer on the personal side. We're working on that as fast as we possibly can. We expect new functionality to drop monthly, and we'll be keeping up to date on our website what the set of functionality is that does and doesn't work for OneDrive for Business. But this is super exciting for me because now, but unlike ever before, you can actually write one bit of code and have it connect to both OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, and you don't have to think about anything other than that. With one asterisk, which is that auth is, of course, different because you have Azure Active Directory auth or Microsoft account auth. So enough of me talking about how cool our API is. Let me actually do a little demo and show off some of the features of the OneDrive API. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Apogee, but it's a API console website that lets you build great little samples. We built one of these when we launched the OneDrive API in February as just a quick, easy way to go play around with the API. You could, of course, use curl or fiddler or any sort of REST client that you're interested in using to go make these calls. The nice thing about this is that you don't have to think about auth, because I can just click here and say, log me in. And now I'm authenticated. You don't have to think about what all the different calls are because we've enumerated them for you. But you can still do basically anything that you want here. So within the console, I'll just do a simple call to api.onedrive.com and get the drive. So this returns information about my drive. You can see things like, here's my display name. My first name is production. You can see the quota remaining on my drive, how much stuff is in my deleted or my recycling bin, how much quota is remaining. The state is sort of how close I am to being over my quota, so I'm completely normal here. You can do things like, oh, let's see. Is that actually, can you guys see that? Is it big enough? So if I go to my root, Then I can pull back. This is the top level folder in my OneDrive, which is something that you don't necessarily see directly, but you can find some information about that. If I want to know what the children are of that folder, I can just ask for the children. Everything comes back nicely. If I want to then drill into something like go to that OD notepad folder, I can do :/OD notepad. And when I submit this, you'll see here's the metadata back for that OD notepad folder. If I want to get its children, I can do it a couple different ways. Instead of doing /children, I will do expand equals children. And this will give me both the folder OD notepad itself as well as a collection of the children files inside that folder. So here's the children collection. And you can see a bunch of different properties in this thing. You may notice that if you're familiar at all with OData, that it should be $expand. We support the standard OData syntax as well, but to make it friendlier for people who weren't using the OData, anytime there's a $, you can just drop the $, and our API will still support it. So you can have nice, clean-looking URLs that don't have $, something everywhere. I want to take a little bit, too, to talk about the metadata that we're actually returning for one of these items. So in the past, or depending on sort of which API you're using, you would see things like object type, which is a very object-oriented world where everything is a particular type of object, and you might think about having inheritance and all of that. In the REST API world and in JSON, those concepts don't really make a ton of sense. And so we've used a slightly different model for our API where we have a concept called, what we've called facets, which isn't a name that is that popular, I suppose. But we use properties on the item to help determine what the item is. So in this case, instead of having a property here that says type equals folder, there's a folder property on this that says, hey, this thing is a folder. If I go get a file out of this, if I get the children collection, whoops, missing a colon. So if I go get a bunch of files, you'll see in this case that this has a file property on top of it that has more information about like what the hashes are in the file, what the MIME type is, that sort of thing. In the basic scenario of files and folders, you might be like, this seems like a weird design pattern. Why is that important? It becomes more interesting when we expand the types of things that we're looking at. So when I get a collection of photos, things come back with a photo facet on them that tell you, here are all the properties of this thing that looks like a photo. Now, you don't have to think about it being a file of a particular type. You don't have to know what types of files are photos on our system. You just have to look for the presence of that photo property to know that OneDrive has considered this thing to be a photo, and here's all the information that we have about it being a photo. Similar with thumbnails, where you might think that only files have thumbnails or only particular types of files have thumbnails, but instead of having to code that logic into your application, you can just say, is the thumbnail property present on this item? If it is, then we know that it has thumbnails, and here are the thumbnails, and here's how that works. So you can sort of, instead of coding in a bunch of logic to understand what different file types are and what's supported by different file types and all of that, you can say, or you can just be very auto-detecting about that sort of thing and say, is there a property that represents what the data is that I'm looking for? If it's there, then this object represents that type of item. If that property isn't there, then this object does not represent that type of item. Another sort of corner case is OneNote. So you can put a OneNote notebook into OneDrive. If you've done that before, you'll notice in the OneDrive UI, it's represented as a single thing that looks like a file. If you actually dig into it inside the API, you'll find a folder that has all of the content of that OneNote notebook underneath it. How do you represent that? Is that a file? Is it a folder? It kind of depends on context. So in our API right now, it actually doesn't return either file or folder. It will return a OneNote facet that says, hey, this thing is different. It isn't one of those things that you think of as a file. It isn't one of those things you think of as a folder. It is a special type of thing called a OneNote notebook. Let's see, what else can I do? Quickly, I can do /special/approot. This gets me back my app folder. So this is the way that I can canonically address my app folder regardless of where the user moves it around inside their OneDrive and always get back the data that I'm looking for. I can do the same thing with /special/documents and get back the user's documents folder, which is nice. If you want to save a document into their document folder or into their pictures folder, you can just quickly jump to that special folder. And then the other thing I talked about was being able to do find changes enumeration. So if I go to root and I say view.changes, And actually, I'm going to limit this a little bit. So I'm going to say top. I only want the top 5 items. And I'm going to select that I just want ID, name, size, and e-tag. And actually, I want folder or file. Oh, e-tag is bad. There we go. So this went through and enumerated all of the, because I didn't provide a sync token, it's giving me a view of my entire OneDrive 5 items at a time with just the set of properties that I've asked for. And then you'll see up here at the top, there's a @changes.token property, which tells me the token that I can use, and @changes.has more changes, which tells me that the 5 items that I got back here actually aren't the complete collection of items in this user's OneDrive. So I can take this sync token and add it here. And this is the next set of 5 changes within that folder. And eventually, if I kept doing this, I would run out of changes, and it'd get to a point where it has more changes would be no, and it wouldn't actually return items, and then I would know that I was up to date. And then if the user makes a bunch of changes, later on I can come back and call view.changes with that same sync token and actually get the set of files that have changed and know that something's been deleted, that something's been moved, or that new files have been created. So now instead of pulling every single folder across an entire OneDrive, you can just call this API, find out what's changed, and process the files that you want to that you have detected have changed. OK, let's switch back over here. So all of the stuff that I showed you, well, almost all of the stuff that I showed you works also for OneDrive for Business today. The view.changes piece is the big part that doesn't work yet for OneDrive for Business. But our goal is that all of these APIs will be aligned across OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, and it's just a matter of us executing to get there. The key differences, though, right now for the OneDrive API on OneDrive for Business are authentication. So you need to go through the OAuth 2 flow using Azure Active Directory, which if you went to like Rob Howard's session yesterday about how to use the Office 365 APIs, then you would have seen a very deep dive into how to handle that OAuth flow. On the consumer side, you use the Microsoft account OAuth flow, which is pretty straightforward. And we have good documentation on our website about how to actually handle all of that. And then OneDrive Personal actually has a single unified endpoint called api.onedrive.com. For OneDrive for Business, you actually need to discover the tenant's endpoint. So you need to use the Office 365 Discovery API to go find the URL that you use to call other APIs. So you'll have to worry about that. The Microsoft Office 365 Unified Endpoint that we have been talking about this week will eventually support this API as well as it gets closer to coming out of preview. And so that will save some of the pain around discovery as well. But similarities, once your app has that access token and knows what URL it needs to call, then all of the code should be the same, modulo the differences that we have right now. So to show off all of this a little bit better, I have a demo called Cloud Roll, which if you think about high business value photos that you might take with your phone, like say every time you take a picture of the whiteboard, and you have some drawings or thoughts or whatever written on the whiteboard, you might not really want that to land in the camera roll on your phone, because if somebody takes your phone, they might have access to that stuff. So this little app is just a simple way of sending a picture straight to your OneDrive or your OneDrive for Business so that it never lands on your phone. On the personal side, I'll leave that up to you guys to imagine the scenarios where you might not want pictures to be in your camera roll. I don't imagine what those are. So this is an app frame or an app shell that handles everything around managing the camera, adding buttons to the screen, all that sort of thing. The interesting code actually is this. So when I post an image, I get an image stream, I get a Boolean flag that indicates whether or not it should go to the personal OneDrive or the business OneDrive, and then whether or not I want to get a share link back out of it. And so there's a little bit of work that I've hidden away in this ensure connection async function, which calls the ADAL library if it's a business user that we're uploading to get back an auth token, or calls the Windows API to get back an access token for the Microsoft account API. And I can, this sample's posted on our GitHub, so you can look at that code. And then once we have that connection back, it's all the same code. So we say, just take the image stream, create a file name out of that image stream, find a parent folder that we want to upload to. So in this case, we're just creating a folder called Cloud Roll. and then put the file into that thing. And literally all the code is exactly the same. The API calls that underlie what the code that you're looking at here is all the same. Everything just works nicely. And then if you're posting to personal, we're going to get a sharing link back out of the system. So we ask for a sharing link. We would do that for business too, but that's also one of those features that isn't quite there yet on the business side. And so for now, we're just going to return a web URL. And if I go over here, yeah, there we go. So here's my Windows Phone. I will launch this Cloud Roll application. I can take a nice picture of the audience, and I'll say, upload this to my consumer OneDrive. And it's going to go out, get an auth token, and upload everything. And you can see, hey, that image was sent to your personal OneDrive. I'm going to take a picture of some important business thing. And using that same code, maybe. Okay, let's try again. All right. Try one more thing. Sign out. Take a picture. Sign into my OneDrive for Business account. And hopefully I get a notification that I got uploaded. There we go. Okay, so now that same app code running the same experience, just depending on which button I clicked, basically said, go to OneDrive Consumer, go to OneDrive for Business. And if I go back to another app that we have built using the same way called OneDrive Explorer. So this is a single-page JavaScript app that's actually one of our samples that we posted back in February for OneDrive Consumer. I've modified it to support both APIs. So if I click here and sign into my OneDrive Personal and go to the Cloud Roll folder, you'll see here's the picture that I just took of the audience, and here's a picture of my hotel room. Everything works great. You get thumbnails, you get all this rich metadata coming back, all from the same code. If I sign out and sign into OneDrive for Business, you'll see here's my OneDrive for Business. Here's that same metadata information that looks the same as what we got out of OneDrive Personal. And if I go into my Cloud Roll folder, now you'll notice there's no thumbnails here because we don't have thumbnail support on OneDrive for Business yet, but that will happen. So if I go actually look at the file, here's that picture that I took of my sensitive business information. So one API across both OneDrive for Business and OneDrive Consumer, working in both JavaScript and on a Windows Phone app, and really on any platform that you want to use it on. Instead of writing a whole separate stack to talk to both services, now I can just write one simple set of code using one simple API and upload to everywhere I want to. So I've said a lot of things about features that don't work on OneDrive for Business yet. I do want to emphasize this is a very early preview of the API for OneDrive for Business. It is available on production tenants today. We're excited for you guys to try it out and tell us how it works, how it doesn't work, what's missing, what's there. We know a bunch of things are missing still. Here's a list of sort of the feedback that we're working on right now. So being able to create and manage sharing links on the OneDrive for Business side is an ask that we've had even of the Files API since October. That will be coming soon. The ability to do the view changes or the sync call, thumbnails, the large file upload, and search are all sort of top things that we've heard. If you have thoughts about what it is that we should go do on the OneDrive for Business side or the OneDrive Personal side, our user voice website is where we listen to a bunch of feedback, as well as our GitHub and Stack Overflow. So we're out there in the community trying to listen to what it is that you guys want and add those features to our API as fast as we possibly can. So the last thing that I want to talk about is something that I'm really excited about. So if you wrote an app that used that view changes API, it really simplified the amount of calls that you had to make to the service because you didn't have to go enumerate every folder and every file and find out what was there. The challenge was, though, that now we have a lot of traffic of people polling that API where every 5 minutes they make that request and see that nothing changed, make that request, see that nothing changed, make that request, finally find something that changed. So we said, well, that's great. We've reduced it from like 10,000 calls to 1,000 calls, but how do we go from 1,000 calls to a whole lot less than that? And so the way that we're going to solve the problem is by releasing a webhooks feature. So if you're familiar with webhooks, it's really just or if you're not familiar with webhooks, it's really a way that our service can ping your service anytime an interesting change occurs on the OneDrive side. And the way that this works is just through a simple HTTP post where for your application, you give us a URL that you want to call anytime something changes on our side, and we'll post to that API and say, hey, something interesting has changed for this user. You should go figure out what to do about it. And so using webhooks, we can take this call pattern that was 10,000 calls polling all the time to 1,000 calls polling just the view changes API to basically one call per change by not having apps need to poll anymore, but actually be told when changes happen. The other thing is we've adopted what we call a poke and pull model for webhooks. So the webhook itself doesn't include any PII. It doesn't include anything other than a user ID or a drive ID where the change has occurred. You need to go back then and use the view changes API or some other set of our APIs to actually figure out what has changed inside that drive. So we're basically just saying like, hey, wake up, something interesting happened. And then you can call back into the API and find out what those changes were using our efficient sync pattern. So I talked about how it works already. So I'll give you guys a demo of how this functionality works. So the setup here is I am writing an app that wants to automatically translate files. And the way that I'm going to do that is I created a directory. I don't have it open anymore. I created a directory inside my OneDrive. Or when I ran the app the first time, it created a directory inside my OneDrive called translate. And the way that the app is designed is that anytime I put a file into this translate folder, it's going to go run a translation algorithm, in this case the Microsoft Translator API, to translate every text file that I put in here from English to German. That seems obvious, right? Like, wouldn't you want every text file in your OneDrive converted to German? Not that that was a bug I had building this or anything. So how does it work? So inside Visual Studio here, I've created an Azure web project, and I added the web API framework when I created it. And then I just create a webhook controller inside that. And you can define the URL to be whatever it is you want it to look like. So in this case, I just did a simple route, which is API/webhook, and then it'll post. In the world where this is out of preview and actually released and available for you guys to use, you would actually have a method on this post parameter, which was the notification body. Due to a bug in the implementation right now, I have to manually parse it, which I wish I didn't have to do because it doesn't look like I know what I'm doing with web API. But so we parse it into a webhook notification, and then I do some telemetry here to be able to track the incoming webhook and know what's going on. And then I look up the subscription or the drive ID that was registered with my system, and I say, let's queue up an action to go do something with that subscription. And if you go look at what my subscription worker is doing in here, let me collapse some stuff. So in here, when a subscription comes in to be updated, I record some telemetry. I grab the refresh token that I've remembered from when the app registered this subscription with me. I redeem that refresh token for an access token so that I can make API calls. And then I just call this process changes for subscriptions, which admittedly, this code's going to be a little ugly. But what it's going to do is loop over the results from the view changes API. So I say, use the last sync token that I remembered from last time I called this, and then get a page of changes back from the service calling the view changes async method, which returns that same API that I was showing you earlier with whatever the files that have changed are. And then based on the files that I know have changed, we call this process changes thing, which basically looks for any text file that has been modified or has been created since the last time the application polled for data, and run it through the Microsoft Translator API to convert it from English to German. And then when I run this, you'll see I can go into OneDrive. I could do this from the sync client. I could do it from an app. I could do it from the website. It doesn't matter where the change comes from. It could even be if I've shared this folder to somebody else and they made the change, the webhook still gets called. But I will go create a new plain text document. I will use the wonderful text editor built into OneDrive to say, hello from San Francisco. And I will hit save. And so This just writes a file back to OneDrive, and now if I switch back to the translate folder, you'll see magically this untitled/_translated.txt file appeared. That was pretty fast. So that webhook went out to Azure. Azure polled for the change back to figure out that untitled.txt had been created, downloaded the contents of that file, ran it through the Microsoft Translator, and wrote this file back. And when I open it back in our text editor, you'll see now I have German for hello from San Francisco. So admittedly, this is a very simple concept around using webhooks, but it's a very powerful concept. If you care about what's going on inside the OneDrive, if you care about what's happening to your app folders, what the user is doing to your app folders, what other users might be doing to your application content, and then reacting to those changes, this is a great way to do it, where things can happen in near real time versus you polling every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or once an hour. And you don't have to have that constant load of your app asking for changes, asking for changes, asking for changes. So it really creates a clean, efficient pattern for your application to be able to respond to data changes in real time. So the webhook feature is not available yet. It will be released in a preview sense over the next couple of weeks. I'd say probably by late May. And the way that it's going to work initially is we don't have a UI for you to be able to register your application's callback URL, so we're going to have an email address. My email address is going to be on our website. And if you're interested in using this feature, we're going to have you email us, and we'll provision everything on the back end to make sure that it works and work with you to make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to. And then when we take it out of preview, there'll actually be a self-service UI so that you can go in and manage your application and manage what the webhook URL is and take care of all of that without contacting me. And then we're also working on it for OneDrive for Business, which tentatively will be late summer or early fall. It's lagging a little bit behind where we are for the consumer side. And then, of course, if you stay tuned to dev.onedrive.com, you can find out more details about when this is coming and when the preview release will be available. So one more thing I want to talk about that isn't directly API related, but is about our documentation. So we set out at the very beginning to build the best API that we could build that was easiest to use, and we knew that a big component of that was building great documentation. And we wanted to build the best documentation, and we had heard tons of feedback from pretty much everybody that documentation was always a sore point and that our documentation wasn't particularly great for our old APIs. So we wanted to change all of that. And so one thing that we did was that we are now actually the people who write the documentation. We've done it all in GitHub so that it's all open source, so that people can actually create pull requests if they want to fix something in the documentation, or if there's a bug, they can open a GitHub issue. And there's direct feedback between the product group and the people using our documentation, and that we can take changes live basically instantly. So when somebody opens an issue about some part of the API not working, a developer picks that up and says, like, oh, was that a bug in our thing or a bug in the documentation? And we can be on top of it and fix these changes and get documentation republished immediately. That's cool, that's a great feedback loop, but it wasn't quite enough for us. So the other thing that we did was we actually have a tool that creates what I would call continuous integration of our documentation, where every time we check in something to our GitHub repository in the documentation, it grabs all of the REST examples out of our documentation and calls them against our service to make sure that they match. So anytime we make any change to our documentation, it runs through a test process, completely automated, against our service to make sure that the API calls as written in the documentation match the API calls that you can make against the service, and that the results coming back from that API match what we tell you it should look like. So there shouldn't ever be a case where an example inside our documentation isn't right. Every single thing in our documentation should match what you can actually do with the service. And the way that you can tell is at the very bottom of dev.onedrive.com. If you click on documentation, you'll find a link to AppVeyor, and it says build passing. So if you click on this, you can actually go see all of the tests that we run. So here is, last time I checked in a change to the documentation, here's everything that happened. So it validates that all the JSON is valid, it validates that all of the resources match what's written in the documentation, and then it actually calls the API to make sure that everything works. And as long as that little thing is green at the bottom, then you know that everything is cool. And if it's not green, then I'm probably working frantically trying to make it green. Also, if our docs aren't great, let us know. Like, that really is a pride point for us. And so if there's something wrong, or there's something that's unclear, or there's something that isn't right, open an issue on our GitHub repository, create a new question on Stack Overflow, shoot me an email. whatever you want to do, like it's my job to go make them great. And so I want to make sure that happens. So key takeaways. I really want you guys building great app experiences that are connected to where users' content is, and more of that content is going into the cloud. It's going into OneDrive for personal, it's going into Office 365, it's going into OneDrive for business. So building great app experiences by connecting into those things is really important. And connecting into OneDrive for business now on this new platform should be really easy, and it should be super fast, and it should be really straightforward. And if you find it isn't that way, like, tell us. Like I can't emphasize enough, like, come join our community, come plug into user voice, come plug into GitHub, let us know what the problems are, let us know what's going on. And we're really early in this journey on our developer platform. We just launched this new API in February. We're launching the OneDrive for Business preview this week. We're gonna be adding a ton of stuff to this developer platform because we really feel that OneDrive and OneDrive for Business is this great cloud backend, great cloud experience for your application that we want applications being built on top of. And so, if there's things out there that you would like to have OneDrive support that we don't support today, if there's capabilities that you're looking for in your application that seem like they are a good fit for cloud storage or cloud file and sync, let us know because we want to build a great platform for you guys to be able to build applications on top of. So like I said, OneDrive API for OneDrive for Business is now available in preview. Webhooks will be coming soon for OneDrive Personal. Webhooks will be coming later for OneDrive for Business. And for the OneDrive API for OneDrive Personal is also available since February. So go out, build great experiences. We use OneDrive and OneDrive for Business to power a bunch of Microsoft experiences. We think that your application should go do that today and start building those apps. And plug into our community. Go to dev.onedrive.com, read all the information that we have there. There's the interactive API console that I showed you on there. There's interactive SDK demos for the pickers and savers that you can use to play around with those things. We're connected into the Stack Overflow community, GitHub, and user voice, so help us learn from you guys and what you're doing. Help us prioritize the right things to move forward on and join our community. And a good way to do that is, of course, through the Office 365 developer program launch. You can stay connected to what's going on in Office 365, be plugged into all of that, and of course, come to our stuff too. And I'd say go collect stickers and get a hoodie, but there are a lot of hoodies, and so I'm not sure what you get for the collecting stickers. But sign up for a developer program. I think we're still giving away a free year of Office 365 developer if you sign up now. Which is a great deal, and it really enables you to go in there and do everything you need on OneDrive for Business, check out our new API on the OneDrive for Business side, and get started. And as a reminder, please evaluate the session. Your feedback is valuable. And if you have any questions, feel free to go to a mic or talk to me. We have about 8 minutes left before this session's over. And otherwise, hope you had a great build. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and it's great talking to you guys.